I am Julian, 28 years old. Exactly 1 year ago, my own parents threw all my belongings onto the front lawn on my birthday to make room for my deadbeat brother's fake influencer career. Now, they are standing on the porch of my luxury condo, demanding to move in and claiming my hard-earned real estate is a family asset. My own mother looked me in the eye today and said, "We gave you the push you needed, Julian. You owe us this house." She was screaming loud enough for the entire HOA neighborhood to hear, threatening a lawsuit for elder abuse right there on my doorstep. But there is one thing they do not know. My lawyer friend had already uncovered their massive IRS tax fraud, and my house is legally locked in an untouchable private trust. And right now, they are about to lose absolutely everything. Before I tell you exactly what happened, hit that like button if you believe in justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Now, let's go back to where it all started. I was standing in the foyer of my brand new home. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the sunlight was pouring through the custom floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, warm shadows across the immaculate hardwood floors. I had just closed on this place a week prior. For the first time in my entire life, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had spent the morning unpacking the last of my boxes, arranging my books on the built-in shelves, and just breathing in the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. This was my sanctuary. This was the physical proof that I had survived the darkest period of my life. I was just walking into the kitchen to make a cup of coffee using the expensive espresso machine I had treated myself to, when the doorbell rang. The chime echoed through the spacious hallway. I was not expecting anyone. My real estate agent, Nadia, had already dropped by earlier in the week with a housewarming gift, and my few close friends knew I was busy settling in. I walked over to the security console mounted on the wall and tapped the screen to view the front porch camera. The blood in my veins instantly turned to ice. My breath caught in my throat. I actually had to grip the edge of the console to steady myself. Standing right there on my front porch were the 3 people I had spent the last 12 months trying to erase from my memory. My mother, Brenda, was standing front and center. She was wearing her signature beige trench coat, her hair perfectly coiffed, her lips set in that familiar, tight line of permanent dissatisfaction. Behind her stood my father, Victor, his shoulders slumped, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking everywhere except at the camera. And leaning against the brick column of my porch, scrolling on his phone with a look of utter boredom, was my younger brother, Felix. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. I had not spoken a single word to them since the day they left me homeless. I had changed my phone number. I had blocked them on every conceivable social media platform. I had cut every tie. Yet, here they were, standing at the door of a highly secure, gated community property that I had purchased in secret. The doorbell rang again, longer and more aggressive this time. I watched Brenda lean closer to the camera, her eyes narrowing as she tried to peer through the frosted glass of the front door. I could have ignored them. I could have walked away, called the community security, and had them escorted off the premises. But something inside me shifted. A year ago, I would have cowered. A year ago, the mere sight of Brenda's angry face would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety. But I was not that broken kid anymore. I was a man who had pulled himself out of the mud. I owned this ground. I took a deep, steadying breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the heavy oak door open. Brenda did not even wait for me to speak. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was doing. The moment the door was open wide enough, she stepped forward, physically pushing past me into the foyer. She walked right into the center of my home, her heels clicking loudly against the hardwood. She slowly turned around, taking in the vaulted ceilings, the modern chandelier, the expensive furnishings. "Well, Julian," Brenda said, her voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet tone that made my skin crawl. "You have certainly done well for yourself. I must say, the pictures do not do it justice." I turned to face her, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. "How did you find this address? And what are you doing in my house?" Victor and Felix had followed her inside. Felix was already looking at my large flat-screen television with a greedy glint in his eye. Victor finally looked at me, giving a weak, pathetic little wave. "We are here to discuss living arrangements," Brenda announced, crossing her arms over her chest as if she were the CEO of my life. "Your father lost his job, and the bank is being completely unreasonable about our mortgage. We are selling the old house. Since you have all this extra space, we have decided it is time for the family to be back together." I stared at her, genuinely wondering if she had lost her mind. "You decided? You decided to move into my home. It is a family asset, Julian," Brenda snapped, dropping the sweet act instantly. "Do not look at me with that disrespectful tone. We sacrificed our entire lives for you. We drained your college fund to keep a roof over your head when you were a child. Everything you are, everything you have is because of us. We gave you the push you needed to succeed. You owe us." I felt a cold, hard laugh bubbling up in my chest. A family asset. She actually believed she had a right to the fruits of my labor. She believed she could discard me like trash, let me hit rock bottom, and then waltz back into my life the moment I struck gold. "You did not give me a push," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You threw me away. You threw my belongings onto the dirt on my 28th birthday. You left me with absolutely nothing. This is my home, not yours, and you are going to leave, right now." Brenda's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. She stepped right up to me, pointing a manicured finger in my face. "You selfish, ungrateful brat. If you think you can hoard all of this wealth while your own flesh and blood struggles, you have another thing coming. We will take legal action. I will drag you through a lawsuit so public and so humiliating you will lose your job. I will tell the police you are committing elder abuse by leaving your aging parents on the street. I will ruin you, Julian." She was screaming now. I could see the veins bulging in her neck. But as she ranted, spewing her toxic threats, I did not feel fear. I felt a profound sense of anticipation. Because Brenda was playing a game of checkers, and I had been playing chess for months. She thought she held the winning hand. She thought I was vulnerable. She had absolutely no idea the level of devastation I had prepared for her. I stood there, looking into the eyes of the woman who had given birth to me, and I felt nothing but cold, clinical detachment. The storm had arrived, but I was the one controlling the lightning. To understand how we reached this explosive moment, how my own parents could justify trying to steal my life, I have to take you back to the old house. I have to show you the nightmare I barely escaped. The old house was a suffocating place. It was a crumbling, two-story structure at the dead end of a declining neighborhood. The paint on the exterior was peeling off in large, gray flakes, and the front porch sagged dangerously to one side. Inside, the house constantly smelled of damp wood, old cooking oil, and a faint, unidentifiable mustiness that clung to your clothes no matter how often you washed them. For the first 27 years of my life, that house was my entire world, and it was a world built entirely on unequal expectations. I worked as a graphic designer and digital marketing specialist for a mid-sized agency downtown. It was a grueling job. I was constantly facing impossible deadlines, demanding clients, and long hours staring at computer screens until my eyes burned. But I was good at it, and my salary reflected that. I was making a very comfortable living for a single guy in his 20s. However, my bank account rarely saw the benefits of my labor. The moment my paycheck cleared, the vast majority of it was transferred directly into Victor's checking account. I paid the electricity. I paid the water and gas. I paid the exorbitant internet bill required for Felix's career. I even bought all the groceries. When the roof started leaking right over the kitchen island, threatening to rot the floorboards, Victor claimed they were completely broke. I had to halt my 401k contributions and drain my emergency savings to pay the contractors. Did I receive any gratitude? Absolutely not. In fact, my financial contributions were treated as a basic, mandatory tax for my existence. Brenda was the orchestrator of this misery. She was a woman who was perpetually unsatisfied with her own life, so she made sure no one else could be happy either. Every evening, when I walked through the front door exhausted from a 10-hour shift, she would be sitting in the living room, waiting. "Julian," she would say, not looking up from her tablet. "When are you going to stop playing with computers and get a real job? Look at the Henderson boy down the street. He is a corporate lawyer. He buys his mother a new car every 2 years. And what do? Make little pictures for the internet." I would try to explain my job to her. I would explain that digital marketing was a massive industry, that I was managing ad campaigns worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But it was useless. In her eyes, because I was not wearing a suit to court or wearing a stethoscope, I was a failure. And then there was Felix. Felix is 2 years younger than me, but he was treated like a fragile, precious artifact. He decided shortly after dropping out of community college that he was going to be an influencer. He bought expensive cameras, ring lights, and designer clothing. He spent his days making highly edited, vapid videos for a small audience, pretending he lived a life of luxury. He never lifted a finger around the house. He never took out the trash. He never paid a single bill. While I was at the grocery store, carefully calculating the cost of generic brand pasta to ensure we stayed within budget, Felix was ordering $50 gourmet sushi deliveries using Brenda's credit card. Whenever I confronted my parents about this glaring double standard, it always ended in a screaming match. "Leave your brother alone, Julian," Victor would yell, finally finding his voice only to defend Felix. "He is building a brand. He is an entrepreneur. You just sit in an office all day. Felix needs creative space. He is going to be a millionaire soon, and then we will all be taken care of." It was a toxic, draining environment. It felt like living in a slow, agonizing funeral for my own self-worth. Every day a little piece of my spirit died. But I stayed. I stayed out of a misplaced sense of duty. I stayed because society tells you that family is everything, that you endure the hardships because blood is thicker than water. I was brainwashed into believing that setting a boundary was an act of betrayal. Then came my 28th birthday. Despite the constant belittling, I genuinely thought that for one day, just one single day out of the year, we could pretend to be a normal family. I was not asking for a party. I was not asking for gifts. I just wanted a sliver of basic human decency. I had been saving up a little bit of cash that I hid from Victor's constant demands. On the morning of my birthday, I stopped by a high-end bakery downtown before work. I bought a beautiful, expensive chocolate mousse cake. Cost more than I should have spent, but I wanted to do something special. I texted Brenda during my lunch break, telling her I had bought a cake and asking if we could all sit down together after dinner. Her reply was brief: "We will see. We might have plans." I pushed down the familiar sting of disappointment and focused on my work. My coworkers had decorated my cubicle, and Clara, the CEO, even bought me a coffee. I felt appreciated at the office. I left work at 6 p.m., carefully placing the cake box in the passenger seat of my car, feeling a small, foolish flicker of hope. Maybe they would surprise me. Maybe Victor would grill some burgers. Maybe Brenda would actually smile. I drove through the familiar streets, turning onto our dead-end road. As my house came into view, my heart stopped beating. I slammed on the brakes so hard the cake box flew off the seat and smashed onto the floorboard. My belongings were scattered across the front lawn. It was not neatly packed boxes. It looked like a bomb had gone off in my bedroom. Black trash bags stuffed with my clothes were tossed haphazardly onto the dying grass. My winter coats were draped over the porch railing. My books, novels I had collected since high school, were dumped in a pile on the driveway. My computer monitor was sitting dangerously close to a puddle of dirty water. I threw the car into park and leaped out, my chest heaving, my mind unable to process the visual information. I ran up the driveway. Brenda, Victor, and Felix were standing on the porch. They were not panicked. They were not apologetic. They were watching me with cold, calculating expressions. "What is this?" I gasped, my voice trembling so hard I could barely form the words. "What is going on? Did we get robbed?" Brenda took a step forward, looking down at me from the top step of the porch. "It is time for you to move out, Julian. You are no longer welcome in this house." I froze. The world around me seemed to tilt on its axis. Move out? Mom, what are you talking about? It is my birthday. Where am I supposed to go? That is not our problem, Brenda replied, her voice completely devoid of empathy. We need the space. Felix's brand is expanding, and he needs your bedroom to build a proper recording studio. We cannot have you dragging down the energy of this house anymore. I looked at Victor, pleading silently. Dad? You are letting her do this? I pay the bills. I keep the lights on. Victor looked at the ground, shuffling his feet. Listen to your mother, Julian. It is for the best. Then Felix chimed in, leaning against the doorframe with a smug, self-satisfied smirk. Maybe you should have thought about securing your own place instead of being such a massive burden all these years. Bro, time to be a real man. A burden. I had bled myself dry to keep a roof over their heads, and they were calling me a burden. The sheer audacity of the lie hit me like a physical blow. Why today? I asked, tears finally spilling hot down my cheeks. Why on my birthday? How can you be so cruel? Brenda looked me dead in the eye, without a single ounce of hesitation. Consider it our gift to you, Julian. Independence. Frankly, you need to grow up. She turned around and walked back inside. Victor followed her. Felix gave me a mock salute before stepping inside and slamming the heavy wooden door shut. The deadbolt clicked. I was left standing alone in the fading evening light, surrounded by the wreckage of my life. I dropped to my knees on the dirty concrete of the driveway, the tears blurring my vision. The pain was so intense it felt like my chest was cracking open. Suddenly, I heard the squeak of a screen door. I looked up and saw Mr. Henderson, our elderly neighbor, walking slowly across the lawn. He was a retired veteran, a quiet man who kept to himself. He stopped in front of me, looking at the trash bags and then at the closed door of my parents' house with an expression of profound disgust. He did not offer empty platitudes. He did not tell me everything would be okay. He simply reached into the pocket of his worn cardigan, pulled out a folded $100 bill, and pressed it firmly into my shaking hand. You are better off, son, Mr. Henderson said roughly. Some trees are completely rotten at the roots. You have to cut them down before they fall on you. He turned and walked back to his house. I gripped that $100 bill like it was a lifeline. I spent the next 2 hours in the dark, frantically stuffing my belongings into the trunk and back seat of my sedan. Every time I picked up a shirt or a book, I felt a fresh wave of humiliation. I drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror. I found a cheap, run-down motel on the outskirts of the city. I paid for a week up front in cash. I hauled a few bags into the room. The air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. The neon sign outside the window flickered a sickening red light across the stained carpet. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, entirely alone. It felt like I was going through a brutal divorce from my own family. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had discarded me on the day I was born. I cried until I physically could not produce any more tears. I cried until my throat was raw and my head pounded. But as the sun began to rise, casting a pale, gray light into that miserable motel room, the crushing sorrow began to harden. The grief slowly crystallized into something entirely different. Crystallized into pure, unadulterated rage. I thought the betrayal was simply a matter of cruelty and favoritism. I had no idea that a massive financial conspiracy was hiding just beneath the surface. The first few days in that motel were a masterclass in survival. I was running on exactly 0 hours of sleep, fueled only by cheap diner coffee and a burning, desperate need to not let my family destroy my life completely. I woke up every morning, put on a wrinkled suit pulled from a trash bag, and drove to the office. I became a machine. I threw myself into my digital marketing campaigns with a level of ferocity I had never tapped into before. When I was staring at spreadsheets and design software, I did not have to think about Brenda's cold eyes. I did not have to think about Felix's smirk. I volunteered for every extra assignment. I stayed late to optimize client accounts. I was often the first one in the building at dawn and the last one to leave when the cleaning crew arrived. But you cannot outrun trauma forever. Eventually, the cracks start to show. It happened on a Thursday night. It was past 9 p.m., and the office was a ghost town of glowing monitors and empty cubicles. I was staring at a complex data report, but the numbers were swimming in front of my eyes. My hands were shaking from too much caffeine and too little nutrition. I heard the sharp click of heels on the polished floor. It was Clara, our CEO. Clara is a formidable woman in her late 40s. She built the agency from the ground up and possesses a radar for bullshit that is second to none. She walked over to my desk, holding a cup of herbal tea. She did not beat around the bush. "Julian," she said, pulling up a chair and sitting down opposite me. "You have billed more hours this week than anyone in the department. Your work is flawless, but you look like a walking corpse. I noticed you wearing the same tie 3 days in a row, and I know your salary is more than enough to afford a dry cleaner. What is going on?" I tried to lie. I tried to feed her a generic excuse about a broken washing machine. But Clara just stared at me, her gaze piercing right through the facade. The dam I had built in my mind completely shattered. I broke down. Right there in the middle of the open plan office, I told her everything. I told her about the years of financial abuse. I told her about Felix. I told her about pulling into the driveway on my birthday to find my life thrown into the dirt. I told her about the flickering neon sign at the motel. Clara listened without interrupting. She did not offer me pity. She did not offer me a hug. Instead, she offered me exactly what I needed: a plan. "Pack your things from that disgusting motel," Clara ordered, standing up. "My husband Silas and I have a large house in the suburbs. Our oldest son just left for college, and his room is empty. You are moving in tomorrow. You will stay there, rent-free, until you find a proper apartment. I will not have my best designer living like a stray dog." I was so stunned I could barely speak. "Clara, I cannot impose like that. It is too much." "It is not an imposition, Julian. It is an investment. You are brilliant at your job, and I need you functioning at 100%. Consider it an executive perk. Now go home, get some sleep, and I will see you tomorrow with your bags." Moving into Clara and Silas's home was like stepping onto another planet. They treated me with a level of respect and basic kindness that I had never experienced in my own home. They invited me to their family dinners. Silas, who was a successful real estate investor, started giving me advice on how to build wealth and manage my finances properly. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. With my living situation stabilized, I needed to address the legal and financial mess my parents had left me in. I reached out to my best friend from college, Marcus. Marcus is a shark. He is a high-powered corporate lawyer who specializes in financial disputes and asset protection. We met up at a quiet steakhouse downtown. I laid everything out for him. I told him how I had been paying the bills, transferring the money to Victor's account. I told him about the eviction. Marcus listened, cutting his steak with precise, measured movements. When I finished, he put his fork down and wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Julian," Marcus said, his tone deadly serious, "people do not violently kick their primary source of income out of the house just to build a recording studio for a failed influencer. The math does not add up. Brenda and Victor are greedy, but they are not stupid. Something else is going on. I need you to give me permission to run some background checks on public financial records associated with their address." I signed the authorization forms that night. A week later, Marcus called me into his law firm. His office was an intimidating space of dark mahogany, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. He was sitting behind his desk, a thick manila folder resting ominously in front of him. He did not look happy. "Sit down, Julian," he instructed. I sat. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. Marcus opened the folder and pushed a series of highlighted documents across the desk toward me. "I did a deep dive into your parents' financials. What I found is bordering on criminal negligence." I stared at the pages, trying to make sense of the dense legal jargon and bank statements. "What am I looking at, Marcus?" "You are looking at Felix's massive, catastrophic failures," Marcus explained, leaning forward. About 8 months ago, your golden child brother decided to play day trader. He took out massive personal loans to invest in a series of highly volatile, essentially fraudulent cryptocurrency schemes. The market tanked. Felix lost everything. He is currently over $150,000 in debt. I gasped. 150 grand? How? He doesn't even have a job. He used your parents' house as collateral, Marcus said grimly. Victor co-signed the loans. When the creditors started knocking, your parents panicked. They took out a massive second mortgage on that rotting house just to keep Felix out of bankruptcy court. I felt the room start to spin. But Marcus was not finished. He pushed another document toward me. This one was a ledger showing bank transfers. This is the part that is going to make you sick, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a low, furious rumble. I traced the utility accounts for that house. The electricity, the water, the internet. They have all been delinquent for months. Julian, the money you transferred to Victor every single month to pay the household bills? It never went to the utility companies. Victor and Brenda were funneling every single cent of your hard-earned salary directly into paying the high-interest premiums on Felix's crypto debt. I sat frozen in the leather chair. The silence in the office was deafening. They did not kick me out because I was a burden. They kicked me out because the well had finally run dry. They had squeezed every drop of financial blood out of me to cover up Felix's disastrous mistakes. And when the creditors started threatening foreclosure, they realized they could not hide the delinquent utility bills from me much longer. They evicted me to cover their tracks. My own mother and father had cannibalized my life, stolen my money, and thrown me onto the street on my birthday to protect the golden child. I looked at Marcus, and the last shred of familial love I had completely disintegrated, turned to ash. They stole from me? I whispered, the reality crashing over me like a tidal wave. My whole life. It was just a lie. Yes, Marcus agreed bluntly. They used you. But here is the good news. Because they were so sloppy, their entire financial house of cards is about to collapse. The IRS is already sniffing around Victor's sudden influx of cash and the questionable loan documents. They are drowning Julian. And soon, they are going to come looking for a life raft. I gripped the arms of the chair. The sadness was gone. The confusion was gone. I felt a surge of absolute, terrifying clarity. They are not getting a life raft, I said, my voice barely recognizable to my own ears. I am going to build a fortress. And when they come begging, I am going to watch them drown. I had the knowledge. Now I needed the power. It was time to rise. The revelation in Marcus's office fundamentally changed my DNA. I was no longer operating out of a desperate need to survive. I was operating with surgical, calculated ambition. I had a target painted on the future, and I was going to hit it dead center. Over the next 8 months, I transformed into an absolute powerhouse at the agency. I was untouchable. I spearheaded a digital rebranding campaign for a massive national retail chain that brought the agency millions in new revenue. I worked with a relentless, cold efficiency. I was the first to volunteer for the hardest clients and the last to leave the strategy meetings. Clara noticed everything. During our quarterly performance reviews, she called me into her glass-walled office. She slid a new contract across her desk. "Julian," she said, a proud smile playing on her lips, "you have outworked, outperformed, and outclassed everyone in the digital department. I am officially promoting you to lead designer. You will be managing the entire team, handling the top-tier accounts, and your salary is being increased by 40%, effective immediately, plus a substantial performance bonus." I signed the contract without a trembling hand. I had earned every single penny of it. The promotion, however, made me a target inside the office. Derek, a senior designer who had been coasting on past successes for years, was furious. He had expected the promotion to be handed to him based on seniority. Derek tried to undermine me at every turn. He would intentionally forget to CC me on important emails, or he would try to casually critique my designs in front of major clients to make me look incompetent. But I was seasoned by Brenda's psychological warfare. Derek was an amateur. During a massive pitch meeting with a tech startup, Derek tried to interrupt my presentation, claiming my data projections were flawed. I did not flinch. I calmly pulled up a secondary slide deck, completely dismantling his argument with hard, undeniable analytics, and exposed his lack of preparation in front of Clara and the clients. The clients signed with us that afternoon. Derek never challenged me in public again. With my new salary and the massive bonus securely in my bank account, I finally had the capital to make my next move. It was time to buy a home. Not just an apartment. A fortress. Silas recommended a high-end real estate agent named Nadia. Nadia was a shark in a tailored suit. I told her exactly what I was looking for. Maximum security, modern amenities, and absolutely zero compromises. We spent weeks touring properties until we found it. A stunning, top-floor luxury condo in a newly developed gated community. It had biometric security at the main entrance, a 24-hour concierge, and a private elevator. It was beautiful, but more importantly, it was impenetrable. Before I closed on the property, I sat down with Marcus again. I remembered his warning about my family eventually coming to look for a life raft. I am buying the condo, I told Marcus, but I do not want my name on the public property records. If Victor or Brenda ever try to search for me, I want them to find a ghost. Marcus smiled, a predatory gleam in his eye. Smart man, we are not putting the deed in your name. I am setting up a private, irrevocable trust. The trust will legally own the real estate. You will be the sole beneficiary. Even if your parents somehow try to file a frivolous lawsuit to claim you owe them money, they cannot touch the house. It is legally shielded from personal liability. It is a financial vault. We executed the paperwork. I moved out of Clara's house, thanking her and Silas profusely for saving my life, and moved into my new condo. For the first few weeks, it was pure bliss. I would stand on my balcony, looking over the city skyline, drinking coffee, and realizing that nobody could ever take this away from me. But peace is a fragile illusion. Started on a Tuesday morning. I was in my home office, reviewing a design brief, when my cell phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number, but the area code was my old hometown. Against my better judgment, I answered. Hello, Julian? Julian, please don't hang up. It was Felix. His voice lacked the arrogant, smug tone I had endured my entire life. He sounded frantic, breathless, and terrified. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, feeling my heart rate slow down to a steady, calm rhythm. What do you want, Felix? We are in trouble, man. Felix pleaded, his voice cracking. Dad lost his job. He got laid off last month. Mom maxed out all her credit cards trying to keep up appearances. The bank is threatening to foreclose on the house. I had some bad investments, Julian. Things went south. We are going to lose everything. You have to help us. Please, you have a great job. Can you wire us some money? Just to cover the mortgage this month. The absolute unmitigated gall of it. The golden child, reduced to begging the brother he had thrown onto the street. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice smooth as glass. You stood on the porch and laughed while Mom threw my life into the dirt on my birthday. You called me a burden. You told me to be a real man. And now, you want me to pay the mortgage on the house you kicked me out of. Julian, please, we are family. We made a mistake. You did not make a mistake, Felix. You made a choice, I replied coldly. You stole the money I gave you for utilities to pay off your crypto debt. I know everything. I know about the second mortgage. I know about the fraud. You dug your own grave. Now lie in it. I hung up the phone and immediately blocked the number. I felt a rush of adrenaline. I had finally drawn the line. I thought that was the end of the chapter. I was wrong. 3 days later, I was having lunch downtown with Greg. Greg was a guy I knew from college who had always orbited around my family, playing both sides of the fence. He was harmless, or so I thought. We were eating at an upscale bistro, chatting about work. So, Greg said casually, taking a sip of his beer, I heard you got some serious new real estate. That building over on Oak Street? Very fancy. Good for you, man. I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I had not told a single soul the address of my new condo except Clara, Silas, and Marcus. Not even the guys at the office knew where I lived. I put my fork down very slowly. I stared directly into Greg's eyes. How do you know I live on Oak Street, Greg? Greg blinked, suddenly looking incredibly nervous. He shifted in his seat, avoiding my gaze. Oh, word gets around. People talk. Nobody talks, Greg, because nobody knows. I pressed, leaning across the table, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Who told you? Greg swallowed hard. He started to sweat. I did not break eye contact. Finally, he cracked. Look, man, I'm sorry, Greg stammered, holding his hands up defensively. Victor called me a few days ago. He was crying. He said they were so worried about you that they just wanted to know you were safe. He offered me $500 if I could find out where you lived. I just looked at your location history on an old app we shared. I didn't think it was a big deal. They are your parents, Julian. $500. For $500, this supposed friend had sold my safety to the people who had destroyed me. I stood up from the table. I dropped a $20 bill on the wood to cover my meal. We are done, Greg, I said, my voice practically shaking with suppressed fury. Lose my number. I walked out of the restaurant and got into my car. My mind was racing a mile a minute. They had my address. They knew I was successful. The phone call from Felix was not just a plea for help. It was a reconnaissance mission. They were desperate, they were bankrupt, and they had just found out their discarded son was living in a luxury fortress. I knew exactly what Brenda was going to do. She was not going to beg. She was going to try and conquer. I immediately called Marcus from the car. Marcus, they have my address. Greg sold me out. Okay, Marcus said, his voice instantly switching to lawyer mode. Do not panic. The trust is ironclad. They cannot touch the property. If they show up, you do not let them in, and you call the police. I am not going to hide, I told Marcus. My grip on the steering will turning my knuckles white. If they come to my door, I am going to end this. Once and for all. I drove home, knowing the storm was no longer on the horizon. It was directly overhead. And as I would soon find out, Brenda was preparing to unleash a hurricane of entitlement that would shatter the very definition of family. The tension in my foyer was so thick and suffocating it felt like the oxygen had been completely sucked out of the room. My mother, Brenda, stood directly in the center of my beautiful, meticulously clean hardwood floors, her muddy shoes leaving faint brown smudges on the polished wood. She had just screamed directly into my face, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of my luxury condo. She threatened me with a massive lawsuit. She threatened to call the police and file false charges of elder abuse if I did not immediately hand over the keys and allow them to move into my property. She truly believed she held all the winning cards in this twisted game. She looked at me with the absolute certainty of a predator who had finally cornered her prey. She expected me to crumble to the floor. She expected me to apologize profusely, to beg for her forgiveness, and to hand over the title to my life just like I used to hand over my entire monthly salary back in that rotting, decaying house. She thought I was completely alone. She thought I was still that terrified, broken 28-year-old kid shivering in a cheap roadside motel room. But I was not alone, and I was no longer broken. What Brenda, Victor, and my utterly useless brother Felix did not realize in their blind, greedy rush to invade my personal space was that I was hosting a very small, highly private housewarming gathering that exact afternoon. The heavy, custom-built oak double doors leading to my formal dining room had been pushed securely closed when the doorbell rang. Now, as Brenda finished her unhinged rant about family obligations and my supposed duty to fund her retirement, those heavy oak doors slowly and silently swung open. Stepping out from the dining room and into the brightly lit foyer was Clara, my agency CEO. She was wearing a pristine, razor-sharp tailored blazer, and her expression was one of absolute, terrifying corporate authority. She did not look angry. She looked like a woman who was about to dismantle a rival company piece by piece. Right behind her was her husband, Silas. Silas is a man who manages multimillion-dollar commercial real estate portfolios, and he possesses a quiet, imposing physical presence that instantly commands respect in any room he enters. And standing right next to Silas, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit, was Marcus, my best friend from college, my ruthless corporate lawyer. Clara had her smartphone raised directly at chest level. The camera lens was pointed straight at Brenda's flushed, angry face. The small red recording indicator light on the screen was blinking steadily, capturing every single second of the confrontation in crisp, high-definition video and audio. Brenda instantly froze. Her mouth, which had been wide open as she prepared to launch into another tirade about her fake inheritance rights, snapped shut so fast I actually heard her teeth click together. Victor, who had been trying to look intimidating, actually took a physical step backward, bumping his hip awkwardly into an expensive marble side table. Felix looked up from his smartphone screen, his arrogant, perpetually smug smirk melting instantly into a look of genuine confusion and rising panic. Clara took one deliberate step forward. Her voice was perfectly calm, beautifully measured, and it echoed with a level of executive power that Brenda had never encountered in her small, bitter life. Clara looked directly into my mother's eyes and stated that every single threat, every single financial demand, and every single word of attempted extortion had just been recorded in full. Clara informed my mother, without raising her voice even a fraction, that threatening a fraudulent lawsuit for elder abuse in a desperate attempt to steal premium real estate was a severe criminal offense in this state. She added that she was a prominent business owner in this city and would be more than happy to provide the raw video footage directly to the district attorney and the local police department before the sun went down. Brenda's face flushed a deep, violent, unhealthy shade of crimson. The sheer audacity of being challenged by another woman, a woman who clearly had far more money, power, and class than she did, shattered her fragile ego. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at Clara and demanded to know who she was and what right she had to be standing inside this house. Brenda screamed at the top of her lungs that this was a private family matter, a dispute over a legitimate family asset, and that all outsiders needed to exit the premises immediately before she called the authorities herself to report a home invasion. I stepped smoothly and deliberately between Brenda and Clara. I blocked my mother's line of sight. I looked Brenda dead in the eye and told her that Clara and Silas were the exact people who put a warm roof over my head when she threw me onto the cold concrete street on my birthday. I told her that they were my invited, honored guests, and that she, Victor, and Felix were currently committing criminal trespass on private property. Felix, desperately trying to salvage his shattered pride and maintain his illusion of superiority, puffed out his chest and took an aggressive step toward me. He pointed his finger at my chest and told me I was making a massive, irreversible mistake. He said I owed them a significant portion of my recent corporate promotion money. He claimed that my childhood college fund had completely drained their savings. A blatant lie, considering I paid for state college entirely with student loans and academic scholarships. Felix actually had the nerve to use the word inheritance. He claimed that since Victor and Brenda were supposedly going to leave me their house one day, I was legally and morally obligated to provide them with this luxury condo right now to balance the scales. It was a masterclass in profound, staggering delusion. The house they were talking about leaving me as an inheritance was currently facing aggressive foreclosure proceedings because they had mortgaged it to the absolute hilt to pay for his fake internet influencer career. They had nothing to leave me except a mountain of debt and a legacy of betrayal. At that exact moment, Marcus stepped past Clara and Silas. He walked over to the massive marble island situated in the center of my open-concept kitchen. He unclasped the brass locks of his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of official legal documents. He slapped the documents down onto the solid marble surface with a sharp, echoing crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Victor physically flinched, pulling his shoulders up to his ears. Marcus adjusted his silk tie, looking at my family with the kind of cold, clinical detachment a skilled surgeon uses when examining a malignant tumor. He introduced himself formally as my retained legal counsel. He then turned his full, unwavering attention to Victor, who was now sweating profusely, a dark patch forming under the collar of his cheap shirt. Marcus began speaking with a rapid, unrelenting legal cadence that left zero room for argument. He told my parents that they had fundamentally and completely misunderstood the core concept of leverage. He explained that Brenda's aggressive threat of a lawsuit was not only legally baseless but entirely, laughably absurd. He challenged Victor to walk into a courthouse, stand before a judge, and explain exactly how they planned to sue their own son for financial abandonment and elder abuse when that exact same son possessed years of certified bank records proving he had paid their utility bills, funded their groceries, and maintained their property right up until the exact afternoon they illegally and violently evicted him without formal written notice. Brenda tried desperately to interrupt. She started screaming that I was an ungrateful, selfish child and that blood obligations completely superseded any bank records or legal technicalities. She yelled that I was clearly wealthy now, living in luxury, and it was my fundamental duty as a son to share my massive salary with the people who gave me life. Marcus did not flinch. He did not even raise his voice to compete with her screaming. He simply talked right over her, his sharp words cutting through her hysterical noise like a freshly sharpened scalpel. He told Brenda that she was currently standing on private, gated property, entirely uninvited, and actively engaging in documented extortion in front of multiple highly credible witnesses. He advised her to close her mouth instantly and listen very, very carefully to what was about to happen next. Because, as Marcus explained with a chilling smile, the reality of their current situation was far, far worse than simply being broke and homeless. I watched the remaining color completely drain from Victor's face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. Victor remembered Marcus from my college graduation party years ago. Victor knew exactly who Marcus was, and he knew perfectly well that Marcus was not a man who ever made empty threats. Victor reached out with a trembling hand and weakly grabbed Brenda's forearm, trying to pull her back toward the front door. He whispered frantically, his voice cracking, suggesting that maybe they should just leave the premises right now and try to talk about the situation later when things were less heated. Brenda violently and aggressively shook his hand off her arm. She was completely unhinged, lost in her own toxic narcissism. She turned her entire body toward me, her eyes wild and manic, and launched into the most vicious, deeply personal psychological attack I had ever witnessed in my entire life. She brought up my childhood. She brought up every single cheap meal she ever cooked for me, every single dollar she ever spent on my discount clothing, wrapping it all in a thick, suffocating layer of maternal guilt. She demanded that I march over to the kitchen counter, hand over the spare keys to the guest bedrooms immediately, and kick my friends out of the house. She claimed that this luxury condo was her rightful property because she had suffered through childbirth, raised me, and molded me into the highly successful corporate man I was today. I did not interrupt her. I let her scream. I stood there, feeling the solid, expensive hardwood floor beneath my feet, feeling the impenetrable walls of the beautiful fortress I had built with my own two hands, and I just let her expend every last drop of her toxic, negative energy. When she finally ran out of breath, her chest heaving violently, her expensive mascara slightly smudged under her wide eyes, the silence that fell over the large room was absolute and profound. I looked at her, and the very last, deeply buried invisible string of familial obligation simply snapped inside my chest. I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated freedom wash over my entire body. I told her, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, that she did not mold me into a successful man. I told her that I became highly successful in spite of her constant abuse. I became successful because I had to fight tooth and nail to survive the total destruction she and Victor caused in my life. Then, I turned my head and gave Marcus a single, firm nod. It was time to completely dismantle their fabricated reality. It was time for the absolute truth to explode in this foyer, and I was going to ensure there was absolutely zero collateral damage on my end of the battlefield. Marcus picked up the first heavy document from the pristine stack resting on the kitchen island. He held it up high so Victor, Brenda, and Felix could clearly see the thick, embossed official state seal stamped prominently at the top of the first page. He looked directly at Brenda, who was still glaring at me with chest-heaving hatred, and delivered the first crushing, undeniable blow. He informed her in a voice devoid of any sympathy that she could go out and hire every single predatory, high-priced divorce or civil litigation lawyer in the entire city, and she still would not be able to legally touch a single square inch of this real estate. He carefully explained that my personal name was nowhere to be found on the property deed. He explained the complex legal concept of an irrevocable private wealth trust. He told them, watching their faces contort in shock, that this luxury condo, the investment bank accounts associated with maintaining it, and all the massive equity built inside it were legally locked inside a financial vault. This vault was completely immune to any personal liability claims, any desperate familial demands, or any frivolous lawsuits they might try to file. Felix's jaw actually dropped open. He looked around the massive living room, taking in the custom furniture and the panoramic city views, suddenly realizing that the golden goose he thought he had successfully cornered was encased behind 10 inches of bulletproof glass. His meal ticket was legally untouchable. But Marcus was just getting warmed up. He placed the trust document back onto the marble counter and picked up a second, significantly thicker file folder. This one had bright red adhesive flags physically attached to dozens of pages, marking critical areas of interest. Marcus turned his attention entirely away from Brenda and focused his laser-like intensity directly onto Victor. He told my father that while his firm was actively investigating the fraudulent transfer of my monthly utility payments to satisfy Felix's disastrous cryptocurrency creditors, they had uncovered a much larger, much more dangerous, and highly illegal pattern of financial behavior. Marcus explained that hiding consumer debt from your son is one thing, but blatantly lying to the federal government is an entirely different, incredibly dangerous game. Victor began to physically tremble. His knees visibly shook beneath his cheap trousers. He took another slow step backward, his shoulder blades hitting the solid wood of my front door. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of the gallows, waiting for the lever to be pulled. Marcus laid the reality out with brutal, terrifying clarity. He revealed that for the past 5 consecutive years, Victor and Brenda had been claiming massive, entirely fraudulent deductions on their federal tax returns. They had been illegally writing off Felix's expensive lifestyle, his designer clothing purchases, his high-end camera equipment, and his travel expenses as legitimate business expenses for an influencer media company that generated absolutely zero taxable revenue. Furthermore, they had been actively hiding the thousands of dollars in cash I gave them every year, failing to report it as income, while simultaneously and fraudulently claiming state low-income assistance programs to subsidize their property taxes. Brenda gasped loudly, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. The aggressive, highly entitled posture she had held for the last 20 minutes completely collapsed inward. She suddenly looked small, old, and terrified. Marcus offered a tight, cold smile, but it was not a friendly expression in the slightest. He told them that as an officer of the court, his law firm had a strict legal obligation to report suspected major federal tax fraud when they uncovered it with hard evidence. He calmly informed my parents that a full, comprehensive dossier of their financial misdeeds, including the forged signatures on the second mortgage documents they used to bail Felix out of his crypto disaster, had already been officially submitted to the Internal Revenue Service investigators. He stated, looking Victor dead in the eye, that a full-scale official federal audit was likely already in active motion. He detailed the consequences. They were looking at massive financial penalties, total property seizure, the freezing of all remaining bank accounts, and potentially significant prison time for deliberate federal tax evasion and wire fraud. The silence that followed that declaration was incredibly heavy, deeply suffocating, and the most profoundly satisfying moment I have ever experienced in my life. Felix backed away from Brenda so fast he almost tripped over the entryway rug. He suddenly realized that the sinking ship he had proudly captained was about to be blown completely out of the water by federal agents. He looked at me, panic wide and raw in his eyes, and started frantically stammering. He threw his hands up, loudly declaring that he had absolutely nothing to do with the taxes, that he never signed any official forms, and that the financial fraud was entirely Mom and Dad's fault. He was turning on his own parents in a heartbeat, desperately trying to save his own skin and avoid federal charges. The golden child was throwing the people who ruined my life right under the bus without a second thought. Brenda looked at me, tears of genuine, unadulterated terror finally forming in the corners of her eyes. The arrogance was completely eradicated, replaced by raw, naked, pathetic desperation. She took a trembling step toward me, reaching her hands out as if to grab my shirt, her voice dropping to a pathetic, whimpering whine. She begged me to call Marcus off. She pleaded with me using my childhood nickname, asking me to use my massive corporate salary to hire them a top-tier criminal defense attorney. She sobbed that I could not possibly let my own flesh and blood parents go to federal prison. I looked down at her outstretched, shaking hands. I remembered standing on the cold concrete driveway on my 28th birthday, begging her for a single logical explanation while my books and clothes sat in the dirt. I remembered the exact tone of her voice when she told me that violently kicking me out was my birthday gift of independence. I looked her dead in the eye, my face a mask of absolute stone, and repeated her exact words back to her. I told her that dealing with the IRS audit and the resulting federal charges was my special gift of true independence to them. I told her that she and Victor finally needed to grow up and face the consequences of their actions. Before Brenda could unleash another hysterical, sobbing scream, the sound of heavy, authoritative footsteps echoed loudly on my front porch. The doorbell did not ring. Instead, there was a loud, sharp, commanding knock on the thick wood of the door frame. I walked past my frozen, terrified family and pulled the front door wide open. Standing there, illuminated by the porch light, was Officer Bennett, a stern-faced, highly experienced veteran of the local police department, accompanied by a younger, broad-shouldered rookie officer. Marcus had called the precinct non-emergency line exactly 30 minutes before my family arrived, anticipating exactly this kind of aggressive trespassing scenario based on Greg's warning. Officer Bennett stepped into the grand foyer, his right hand resting casually but firmly on his heavy utility belt. He took in the entire scene in one sweeping glance. Clara standing tall with her smartphone still actively recording the encounter. Marcus standing behind a massive stack of official legal documents like a prosecutor, and my family looking like they had just been handed a death sentence. I spoke clearly and calmly, ensuring Clara's video captured every word. I informed Officer Bennett that these three individuals were actively trespassing on my private property, that they had engaged in verbal extortion by threatening fake lawsuits, and that I wanted them removed from the premises immediately and permanently. Brenda tried to play the ultimate victim card one last, desperate time. She rushed toward the veteran officer, tears streaming rapidly down her face, crying hysterically that this was a terrible family misunderstanding. She lied to the police officer's face, claiming that I was a deeply confused child going through a severe mental breakdown, and that they were simply trying to help me manage my finances and protect my real estate investments. Clara stepped forward smoothly. She did not argue. She simply held out her smartphone and showed Officer Bennett the clear video footage. She played the exact moment Brenda explicitly threatened to file a fake, malicious lawsuit for elder abuse in order to steal the condo. Officer Bennett's expression instantly turned to hard stone. He looked at Victor, then at Brenda, and finally at Felix with total disgust. He did not ask them politely. He pointed a firm finger toward the open door and ordered them to step out onto the front porch immediately. He issued a stern, undeniable warning that if they resisted, argued, or hesitated for even 1 second, they would be leaving my property in tight steel handcuffs, charged with criminal trespass and attempted extortion. Victor broke first, his spirit completely shattered. He put his head down, pushed past the two police officers without making eye contact, and walked slowly out to their beat-up, rusted sedan parked illegally on the street. Felix followed closely behind his father, keeping his head down, pulling his hood up over his face, looking absolutely terrified of the heavy police presence and the looming threat of jail time. Brenda was the very last to leave. She stood in the doorway for one long, agonizing moment, looking back at me. There was no motherly love in her eyes. There was no regret for the pain she caused me. There was only the bitter, highly toxic, venomous hatred of a vicious predator who suddenly realized she had permanently become the prey. She opened her mouth to say something cruel, but Officer Bennett stepped toward her, his hand moving slightly on his belt, pointing emphatically toward the street. She turned in defeat and walked away. I stood in the doorway, the cool evening breeze hitting my face, watching them get into their terrible car and drive slowly out of the secure, gated community. They were gone. The brutal storm was finally over, and my beautiful fortress remained entirely untouched. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Now, let me tell you about the absolute, devastating collapse of their entire empire, and the final, shocking twist that revealed the true, hidden puppet master behind my family's madness. The immediate aftermath of that explosive confrontation was a masterclass in swift, unforgiving legal precision. Marcus did not waste a single second allowing them room to breathe or regroup. The very next morning, right as the courthouse doors opened at 8 a.m., we were standing before a county judge filing an emergency petition for a permanent restraining order. We presented a mountain of undeniable evidence. Clara's crystal-clear video footage of the extortion attempt, my certified bank statements proving the years of severe financial abuse, and the official police incident report filed by Officer Bennett. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman with zero tolerance for familial exploitation, reviewed the files, looked at me with genuine sympathy, and granted the maximum distance restraining order without a moment of hesitation. Brenda, Victor, and Felix were legally and strictly barred from coming within 500 feet of me, my luxury condo, or my corporate workplace. They tried to fight back, of course, because narcissists never go down quietly. But their weapons were pathetic and incredibly predictable. Brenda launched a massive, unhinged smear campaign on Facebook. She posted incredibly long, highly dramatic, hysterical rants claiming that I had maliciously abandoned them in their old age. She wrote that corporate success and a high salary had turned me into an evil, greedy monster, and that I was intentionally leaving my loving parents to starve in the streets while I lived like a king. She tried desperately to rally our extended family members and old neighborhood acquaintances to her side, painting herself as the ultimate tragic, heartbroken mother suffering a terrible injustice. A year ago, reading those vicious posts would have completely destroyed my mental health. I would have spent hours staying awake in bed, drafting long, defensive replies, desperately trying to prove my innocence to a bunch of people who ultimately did not matter. I would have let the guilt eat me alive. But now, I did not even flinch. I completely ignored it. I let her scream her lies into the digital void. And the beautiful thing about the undeniable truth is that it always leaves an unshakable paper trail. When the bank finally moved forward and foreclosed on their rotting house a month later, physically evicting them, and the IRS officially froze all of their remaining bank accounts pending the massive federal fraud audit, the flying monkeys and sympathetic commenters on Facebook suddenly went entirely silent. Nobody wanted to be associated with federal tax evaders. Felix's entirely fake influencer career crashed spectacularly and permanently. Without my monthly salary to secretly fund his lavish lifestyle, and with his parents' credit scores completely destroyed by the foreclosure, he could no longer afford the expensive camera lenses, the designer streetwear, or the high-speed internet bill. The last piece of news I heard through a mutual college acquaintance was that Felix was working the deep fry station at a local fast food drive-thru. He was wearing a greasy paper hat, smelling like old oil, finally learning the harsh, brutal reality of what it actually meant to work for a living wage. While their corrupt world burned entirely to the ground, leaving them with nothing, my world was taking off like a rocket ship. My relentless work ethic and innovative designs at the agency had caught the attention of several major tech investors in the city. Silas, Clara's husband, invited me to a highly private dinner at an exclusive steakhouse. Over a bottle of expensive wine, he told me that my talent was simply too big and too valuable to be contained within someone else's corporate structure forever. He offered to become my primary angel investor, backing me with serious capital if I wanted to launch my own independent digital marketing firm. Clara gave me her absolute, unconditional blessing, telling me she knew this day would eventually come and that she was incredibly proud of me. I took the massive leap of faith. Within 6 short months, my newly launched firm secured 3 massive corporate retainer contracts. The revenue generated was staggering. I had built a highly profitable empire directly from the ashes of my old, miserable life. To properly celebrate my first $1 million revenue quarter, I decided to finally reward myself for the years of driving that beat-up, unreliable sedan with the broken heater. I walked into a high-end luxury dealership downtown. The salesman tried to steer me toward the practical, entry-level models, assuming I was just browsing. But I knew exactly what I wanted. I pointed to the showroom floor, signed the extensive paperwork, wired the funds directly from my business account to pay in cash, and drove off the pristine lot in a brand-new, midnight black Porsche. The deep, guttural roar of that incredible engine echoing off the city buildings was the ultimate sound of absolute, undeniable victory. I truly thought the heavy book was completely closed on my toxic past. I believed all the loose ends were tied up. But the universe always has a strange way of throwing one last, incredibly sharp curveball when you least expect it. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was sitting on my balcony, enjoying a cup of coffee and watching the sunset, when my personal cell phone chimed with a long text message from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a rambling, highly emotional message from my Aunt Sylvia, Victor's older sister. Aunt Sylvia had always meticulously played the role of the sweet, deeply caring aunt in our family dynamic. She was the designated peacemaker, the one who always brought homemade potato salad to the stressful Thanksgiving dinners, and the one who always clucked her tongue sympathetically whenever Brenda yelled at me for no reason. The text message was a pathetic, transparent attempt at family reconciliation. She wrote that she was completely heartbroken about the severe division in the family. She claimed she missed me terribly, and that she prayed every night that I could find it in my heart to forgive my parents for their supposed minor transgressions. She ended the long message by casually, almost as an afterthought, asking if I had a spare bedroom she could stay in for a few weeks because she was suddenly experiencing some unexpected, severe financial trouble and needed a quiet place to figure things out. Something about the specific phrasing of her message felt incredibly off. It felt highly manipulative, setting a familiar trap. My instincts, sharpened by years of Brenda's abuse, flared up. I took a screenshot of the text message and sent it directly to Marcus, asking if he had happened to come across Aunt Sylvia's name during his extensive financial deep dive into my parents' seized accounts. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Marcus. He sounded incredibly grim, almost angry. He told me he had missed a highly crucial, deeply buried detail in the initial sweep of the banking records. Prompted by my screenshot, he dug much deeper into the historical wire transfers between my family members. It turned out that Brenda and Victor did not just owe massive amounts of money to anonymous cryptocurrency creditors. They were actually in massive, crippling, high-interest debt directly to Aunt Sylvia. Marcus explained the horrifying truth. Years ago, Aunt Sylvia had masterminded and orchestrated a highly illegal scheme involving a fake inheritance claim designed to siphon tens of thousands of dollars from an elderly, distant relative's estate. She had manipulated and roped Victor into the scam, using him as the public front man to sign the forged documents. The entire scheme eventually fell apart when a real lawyer got involved, and Victor ended up legally owing Sylvia exactly $50,000 to cover her emergency legal defense fees to keep her out of jail. The massive twist hit me so hard I actually had to sit down on my balcony chair. Sylvia was not the sweet, caring peacemaker. She was not the innocent bystander at Thanksgiving. She was the ultimate cold-blooded puppet master. She was the person who had been relentlessly pressuring Brenda and Victor for the money they owed her. When Felix lost everything in the crypto crash, and the house went into foreclosure, Sylvia realized with absolute certainty she was never going to get her 50 grand back from my bankrupt parents. So, like a true parasite, she pointed them directly at my new wealth. Marcus had legally subpoenaed internet service provider records and found a highly incriminating email exchange between Sylvia and Brenda dated exactly 3 days before they violently showed up at my condo. Sylvia had explicitly instructed Brenda to go to my house, demand to move in, and aggressively threaten me with the fake elder abuse lawsuit. Sylvia's master plan was for them to extort a massive cash settlement from me, or force me to sell the luxury real estate, just so my parents could pay her back the $50,000 they owed. The very person who had always pretended to care about my emotional well-being, the woman who hugged me at funerals and smiled at family gatherings, was the exact person who engineered and ordered the violent home invasion that nearly shattered my peace. I did not reply to her text message with anger. I did not call her to demand a screaming explanation. I did not need closure from a monster. I simply forwarded the entire PDF file of the incriminating email exchange Marcus had uncovered directly to her phone. I followed the PDF with a single, legally binding sentence. Do not ever attempt to contact me again, or these emails go directly to the district attorney to be added to Victor's federal fraud case. I blocked her number permanently. I severed the final, deeply diseased root of my family tree. I cut the rot out completely. And for the very first time in my entire existence, the profound silence that followed was not lonely, sad, or isolating. It was absolutely beautiful. 2 full, incredibly healing years have passed since that explosive, life-altering confrontation in my foyer. Tonight, I am standing on the expansive, wraparound balcony of my luxury condo. The massive city skyline is spread out gloriously before me, a glittering, vibrant ocean of lights stretching far into the dark horizon. The night air is cool and crisp, carrying the faint energy of a city that never stops moving. I am holding a crystal glass of very expensive, perfectly aged red wine, listening to the faint, distant hum of traffic far below. Parked safely in the highly secure, climate-controlled garage downstairs is my Porsche, a beautiful, daily physical reminder that relentless hard work, unbreakable self-belief, and unyielding personal boundaries yield incredibly powerful rewards. My independent digital marketing firm has more than tripled in size since I launched it. I have a dedicated, brilliant, highly compensated team of designers and strategists working for me. We are taking on international clients now. Clara and Silas come over for catered dinners at my place at least once a month, and Marcus is a permanent, essential fixture in my life. He is practically a brother to me at this point, the family I actively chose rather than the one I was forced into. As for my biological family, they are standing exactly where they put themselves through their own greed and malice. The IRS thoroughly completed their exhaustive audit, levying financial fines and fraud penalties so massive that Victor and Brenda were forced into absolute, total, unrecoverable bankruptcy. They are currently renting a tiny, run-down, 1-bedroom apartment in a highly dangerous part of town, constantly dodging aggressive debt collectors and living in perpetual fear of further legal action. Felix is still flipping greasy burgers and mopping floors, his grand delusions of internet stardom completely dead, buried deep under the harsh, inescapable reality of minimum wage labor. Aunt Sylvia vanished completely from the state, terrified that I would hand over her extortion emails to the federal authorities. They are reaping exactly what they sowed into the earth. I do not feel a sense of joyful, manic glee at their intense suffering. I do not sit around my beautiful living room plotting further acts of revenge. The honest truth is, I rarely think about them much at all anymore. They are simply ghosts from a past life, a dark, cautionary tale about exactly what happens when you treat human beings like disposable financial resources. The painful journey to get to this balcony was not easy. It required me to completely break down every single lie, every single toxic narrative I had been taught by society about family. Society constantly and aggressively pushes this false narrative that blood is everything. We are told from a young age that we absolutely have to forgive our parents no matter what, that we have to endure their toxicity because they gave us life, and that setting firm boundaries is a sign of ultimate disrespect. We are brainwashed by movies and culture into accepting emotional and financial abuse simply because the person hurting us happens to share our DNA. But sitting in that cheap, terrifying motel room 2 years ago, looking at my entire life packed into black plastic trash bags, I realized the ultimate, undeniable truth. Blood does not make a family. Respect, unwavering loyalty, and unconditional, selfless support make a family. My parents weaponized my natural sense of duty and used it against me. They drained my salary, they sacrificed my mental health, they stole my peace, and they discarded me like garbage the very moment I was no longer financially useful to the golden child. And when they realized I had successfully rebuilt my life from the ashes, they tried to steal my success, masking their intense greed behind the sacred, untouchable title of family. If there is one crucial, life-saving thing I want you to take away from my story today, it is this: you absolutely do not owe your abusers anything. You do not owe them your precious time, you do not owe them your hard-earned money, you do not owe them access to your home, and you certainly do not owe them your peace of mind. It does not matter if they raised you. It does not matter if they paid for your food or your clothes when you were a helpless child. That is the basic, fundamental, legal requirement of bringing a human life into this world. It is a legal obligation, not a lifelong debt that you have to endlessly repay by sacrificing your own soul. Walking away from my family was the hardest, most painful thing I ever had to do. It felt exactly like tearing off a physical limb without anesthesia. There were nights during that first year where I woke up in a freezing cold sweat, my heart pounding, drowning in a sea of conditioned guilt, wondering if I was the evil villain they claimed I was on Facebook. But every single time I held my ground, every single time I refused to answer their calls, every time I enforced my legal boundaries, that heavy guilt faded a little bit more. It was replaced by strength. I replaced the broken family I was born into with the beautiful family I actively chose. Clara, Silas, Marcus, Nadia, the real estate agent. These are the people who saw my true value when I had absolutely nothing to offer them. They are the people who stood by my side and celebrated my victories without secretly trying to steal the trophy for themselves. They are my real, true family. Protecting your inner peace is not a selfish act. Locking your doors against toxic, manipulative people is not cruel. It is an act of profound, necessary self-love and survival. You have the absolute, undeniable right to build a massive fortress for yourself, and you have the absolute, undeniable right to decide exactly who gets to hold the keys to the front door. So stand your ground, build your wealth, protect your salary, create your own beautiful sanctuary, and never, ever let anyone, no matter who they are, make you feel guilty for simply surviving the fire they intentionally started. Thank you so much for listening to my journey today. It means the absolute world to me to be able to share this reality with you, and to know that my survival might help someone else out there who is currently walking through the dark. Now, I genuinely want to hear from you. Have you ever faced something similar with your own toxic family dynamics? Have you ever had to draw a hard line in the sand, pack your bags, and walk away from manipulative relatives to save yourself? Share your story in the comments below, because your voice matters and your experience could help someone else feel less alone. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and always protect your peace.